So guys, it's 4:30 and it's time for another exciting conversation, another exciting episode of the Fisdom Wealth Space. And today with us we have an extremely interesting guest live with us. With us we have Mr. Arvind Chari. He is the CIO of Quantum Advisors, and today's episode is going to be dedicated to unraveling the mysteries that lie within the Indian economy, capital markets, and portfolios. So, Arvind, a very warm welcome to the Fisdom Wealth Space.
Nirav, thank you so much. Thank you to Fishdom and my first Twitter Spaces as speaker. So great to be here.
I'm so glad that your first appearance on Twitter Spaces is with Fisdom. It's a pleasure to be hosting you. So, Arvind, right off the bat, I am going to ask the quintessential question that I always ask. It
Yeah.
is market kya bolta hai. So how do you think the economy is shaping up, the global economy, the Indian economy, and how is it all translating into capital markets?
Let's start with global economy because that kind of tends to be the driver for many things, short term and long term.
Yes.
Uh, so I didn't want to start with the alphabet word, but we've been talking about U-shaped, V-shaped, and K-shaped, and the global economy is actually in a very clear K-shaped movement. And so the K-shape is developed market versus emerging markets, right? So developed markets, vaccination levels have been much better. Activity levels have improved. They've come back. They've had a very large fiscal stimulus. In some pockets in the U.S., you already have, you know, employment. There's a tightness in the labor market. Unemployment levels have gone down quite a bit. Real estate across many of the developed market cities is actually quite booming. And compare that with emerging markets and keep India in mind. Jobs are still scarred, incomes are still scarred, unemployment levels are higher. Investment activity has not picked up as much, right? And overall activity, if you compare with pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's still below
Hmm.
in many aspects. So that's the background. And the good thing is that the global fiscal stimulus that especially the developed world and the emerging market world have have put up is actually good to see. It is a risk from a longer term debt perspective, but I think growth is more important than debt, right? So the world needs investments and the world needs the growth, and all that 10, 12 trillion dollars of fiscal support and stimulus that has been happening. I think that is good. And if you look at it from a perspective, if you look at the previous decade, right from when the US credit rating got downgraded in August 2011,
Hmm.
and then we had the European sovereign debt crisis in 2012, then we had taper tantrum in 2013, and you've seen most governments go into what is called as fiscal austerity, right? Cutting
Right.
fiscal deficit, reducing debt levels, trying to keep inflation under control and stuff like that. And that has had lower inflation, but also had meant lower investments and hence lower growth. So
Hmm.
this focus on trying to get fiscal stimulus and fiscal spending increases is good to see because overall fiscal spending tends to be more diverse, right? More broad based, right? More segments and pockets of the economy get benefited when the government spends. Like it could be income support, it could be production subsidies, it could be spending on health, spending on hospitals, education, infrastructure. Many more segments of the population get the benefits of that higher government spending, as against, say, a central bank running a quantitative easing monetary policy, where most of the money gets first channelized to the financial markets, and then you hope that from the financial market this flows on the economy. And at some places it happened, most places hasn't, and then income inequality, all that, right? I mean,
Right.
that those things have happened. So from that perspective, fiscal, I'm very hopeful of the fact that this fiscal stimulus, if the world does not get worried about debt levels by that much, and the fiscal stimulus is allowed to run for a period of time, you will see broad-based growth and income inequality getting addressed. In the very near term, globally, there are signs of very clear slowdown. Right, Delta variant, which impacted India in
Hmm.
in May and June, April and May, is now spreading globally, and it is showing its impact everywhere. And in countries where vaccination levels have been poor, they've been as devastated as India was in that period. Countries where there were vaccinations, but there's still been some lockdowns, some falling activity, and you can see that in very real time data, right? You can see that in China also. Chinese economy, which has done phenomenally well post COVID, is also slowing down. So there are some short term worries, but overall, you should be hopeful of a global recovery. I'll stop there, and if you have any questions on that, otherwise, then we'll go to Indian economy.
No, please, please. I want to. I'm really excited to hear how you tie this all to the Indian economy and distill it to the equity capital markets.
Sure. So, if I look at how it plays out for India, I'll just again give some perspective. We were very worried before pre-COVID, right? The Indian GDP growth had slowed down to around that 4% level. Unemployment levels had gone up. Labor force participation, especially for women, was been falling for some time. Capex had not grown, and then we had COVID. So you had demonetization in 2016, the impact of GST in 2017, the ILFS credit crisis and its aftermath in 2018 in terms of risk aversion and credit falling, and then you had COVID, right?
Okay.
So this was a very worrying sign, and at Quantum, we've always held that India's long-term GDP growth potential in real terms, real GDP, is about 6.5%. So even during the brick mania, how many, I don't know how many you remember, between 2003 and 2007, India was supposed to be the brick country and everybody was gung-ho, and it was India's birthright to grow at 9-10%. We didn't believe it then, because sustaining growth at 8-9% over a long period of time requires whole lot of reforms, whole lot of changes, lot of things working together, private, households, government. It didn't happen, and then India has now, back to, if you look at a 20-year average of Indian GDP growth, it's about 7%. If you look at a 40-year average since the first reform started in 1980, it's 6.2, 6.3%. So India is still in that 6.5, very good growth from a global perspective, lower than what you would have normally expected from India. So we were worried that is India's potential long-term growth, has it gone below 6% also? And we did a lot of studies around it. Two things which made us change it and come back and say that India can still grow at a 6.5% was, one was as I said about this uh, the global stimulus, right? Just the support from the global economy in terms of the global fiscal stimulus and spending, and so that has an impact. Like when global governments spend, it leads to investment across the world and consumption, which leads to export opportunity for many countries. So if you look at India's exports, if I look at a 12-month period, I'm getting into data, but if I look at 12-month period between 2019 and July 2020, it was in a run rate of $260 billion, right? If I look at July 2021 and June 2020, it's at about $350 billion, which means India's exports in dollar terms has increased in the last year after COVID also. And that's the pure impact of global recovery and global stimulus. So that's one reason why I think India can sustain at a slightly, at that in that 6.5% growth. The other very crucially was Prime Minister Modi relenting on fiscal. Prior to that, we believed that he's a fiscal hawk. He not allow fiscal deficit to go up, and come what may, you'll do above the line, below the line, but try and keep the fiscal deficit at that 3.5% range. Fortunately and wisely so, they relented, and they had to. But they also, not only did they increase fiscal deficit for this year, but they've also committed that India's fiscal will remain at a higher level at about 4.5% till FY26. That's a 5-year period. That's a huge amount of fiscal spending capacity that the Indian government now has to be able to do whatever it wants to do. It can give income support. We would like to see more of that. It can build capex. It can go back to the welfare measures. Some of the welfare measures that Modi started. Gas and Jandan and electricity and water. It can do a whole host of things. We have to worry. I mean, India is an emerging market. We are dependent on foreign capital, so there is a debt and inflation problem. But India is still predominantly a growth market, right?
Right.
India has to grow at that 6.5, 7% level for many of the people to come out of poverty, and then we have a billion people, but we do not have a billion consumer, right? We the top 100, 200 million people in India are the consumers. The rest, 700 million people are subsistence, and the last 200 million are poor, right? So that's the makeup. So you need more and more people to move from poverty to subsistence, and then subsistence into consumers. And that is what the entire long-term India growth story is basically that, right? That we are a young nation, we will be able to grow over a period of time, and then if India's potential goes to 4%, 5%, then you don't achieve all those things that you wanted to achieve for people in terms of income, in terms of welfare, in terms of support. So we think we are still not in the 7%, and I think we should forget about that. But India should be able to grow at that 6.5. So supported by global fiscal stimulus, global interest rates being low, and a fiscal support that is there, an interim support of about next 2-3 years, to be able to get the growth back in. Along with that, you would also see the PLI scheme. That seems interesting. We'll have to wait and watch how it goes.
Right.
But if it is able to get some manufacturing, some activity, some wage intensive or labor intensive manufacturing going.
Right.
Otherwise, we were worried. I mean, there are a lot of wrong steps that the Modi government took to get the economy where it was. Very delayed response to the IL&FS crisis, very delayed in bank recap. But somehow looks like there is still risk. I mean, if you look at CMI data, the employment levels are still much lower for a country like us. The employment to population ratio is at a very dangerous level, and it needs to go up. People's incomes also. A lot of people have lost income, even though they have got back their job, but they are working at a slightly lower income than they were working, which itself was very low.
Right.
So some worries, but some good points also. This is how I tie up between global and India.
Right. Very interesting points made, Arvind. And there is one point you made around, expecting the GDP growth to be pegged in the ballpark of around 6.5% base case approximately, right?
Yeah.
So if one were to look at the situation, and take draw upon learnings from history, India has been able to sustain a GDP growth of almost 6.5 to 7%. Even in the past, with higher interest rates and higher CPIs, which is the inflation, versus what it is today. So today, with such soft interest rates around, and the inflation being well below, well within the RBI's target range, or let's say just flirting around with the higher threshold of RBI's target range.
Correct.
If one were to take a historical, learnings from history, it seems pretty achievable. But at the same time, the situation is not like the way it was back then, right? Today, we are dealing with a multitude of problems for the first time. Obviously, in its very essence, for the first time, the economy is still recovering from the pandemic shock. The supply chain has been disrupted. We are talking about abundance of liquidity, but lack of directionality in most liquidity. No systemic uptick in terms of credit offtake, in these terms. So the RBI is not left with many options. Obviously, the street is filled with whispers around RBI raising their policy rates by almost 0.25% at least in the next upcoming next 2 quarters at least once. So having these talks, there are also schools of thought that even if RBI is expecting India to grow really fast and go beyond your pegged estimates of 6.5%, it would take some time for the economy to achieve it, and a lower rate would definitely be helpful in achieving it faster and much efficiently. And at the same time, if the economy does not rebound as well as people are expecting it to, even in that situation, lower rates would be required, but more from a survival standpoint than a growth standpoint. And in either way, both these barometers seem to be pointing towards a lower interest rate regime for slightly longer. But at the same time, there are talks around the inflationary pressure, putting, and the fiscal situation putting tremendous amount of upside pressure on the rates, and the lack of RBI having the ability to hold on to lower rates. So with so many evolving dynamics, how should one read into the situation, and what are your views on the interest rates? How do you think will it move?
Yeah. So after the August monetary policy that the RBI announced, we put out a note specifically on this. Can India sustain at lower rates than average? So if I go back to averages, the 10-year repo rate average in India is about 6.8. The
Mm,
10-year bond yield, 10-year
mhm,
average of a 10-year bond yield is about 7.6. Right now, the repo rate is at 4%. The operative monetary policy rate is at 3.35, right? And the 10-year bond yield is somewhere around 6 quarter. So, as you said, we are at much lower interest rates as compared to historical. And whenever, and we've seen that. We've seen all that in 2003, then we saw that post Lehman in 2008, right? We've seen this where interest rates go to below 4%. And then as the growth recovers and as fiscal deficit widens and then inflation picks up, the repo rate again gets hiked up. So your question is, can it be will it increase and will it be lower, right? So we
right.
think the what we call as normalization of monetary policy, right, which is some amount of increase in interest rates, which is reverse repo, the policy rate becoming repo rate and then the repo rate going up,
Mm,
and also liquidity, right? If you,
mm,
on an average, 1 to 2 trillion or 1 lakh crore to 2 lakh crore plus or minus used to be the system liquidity in the banking system. Today, that is 10 to 11 trillion or 10 to 11 lakh crore. That's significant amount of money that the RBI has added to the banking system to, from various reasons, mostly for to support the economy. So when they normalize, they will reduce the amount of liquidity that is there over a period of time, and they will use different various instruments, some short term, some long term, to do it, and they'll also hike interest rates. But we believe this will be slow.
mm,
Just to answer exactly what you said, that they will, the RBI right now believes that the economy requires time to get back to that. Maybe in my mind, I think they think India can still grow at that 7%. So they will allow the macro economy that much time for that. The GDP growth in the future, in the next 3-4 years, should come back to that average of about 7%. So they will try and keep rates low, which means that repo rate might not be at 6.5. Maybe they will try and hold it at say 5%. One other reason why they can, I mean, this is in their mind how they can do it. Yeah, you all know that India now follows something called the inflation targeting, right? There's a target
mm,
the CPI inflation, consumer price inflation, at
mm,
4% with a band
mm,
of 2 and 6.
mm,
They don't do it anymore. I mean, if you see
mm,
their news statements, they say inflation should be in a band of 2 and 6. So
mm,
if CPI is below 6, also they are willing to tolerate that higher inflation to be
right.
able to give time for the economy to recover and grow. So this has implications in the sense that if say if they're able to do it, I think they will find it tough, because in India, some amount of inflation always comes about because we are a supply constrained economy, right? So whenever there is a excess liquidity, excess money, and then growth picks up, you tend to get some amount of inflation here and there, either in food or in global commodity prices or in domestic services. So it'll be tough for them to hold rates at a low level. But if they happen to do it, say they hold the repo rate for some time at 5%, and which means that and inflation say remains at 5.5, 6%, which means that the real interest rates remain negative, right? Which has
Right.
not been the case from 2014 to 2018 under Rajan and Urjit Patel. The real ratio is supposed to be positive, right? So
Right.
that has implications for fixed income, like uh, investors who put their money in fixed deposits or in liquid funds or short-term debt funds. They should assume and that their returns from these products will remain low for a long period of time, and also live with it. Make peace with it, that I'm not going to get 8% on my fixed deposit anytime soon, right? So
Right.
do not try to take risk on an asset which is supposed to be for safe and liquid, which is fixed income, and don't try to earn that extra 1.5% by taking risk. Just live with the fact that the rates are going to be low. You might be, real interest rates will be negative on most of your fixed income products, but just live with it and live through that cycle. So that has implications for investors.
Right, right. Absolutely. Very interesting insights on this. And I will further the question in direction of equity capital markets specifically.
Yeah.
And, let me just share a running joke that I've been hearing between investors. People have now started saying that it seems like COVID has caused valuations to socially itself from economic fundamentals, where so there are talks about the valuation running much ahead of the fundamentals, and there is just too much and too exuberant, or rather over optimistic expectations being priced in by the markets. There are few who attribute it to dumb money and smart money coming in at the same time,
Yeah.
given the excessive liquidity in the markets. So people are also skeptical about making newer investments at this point in time. In fact, there are many experts who have put out their views, warning of a crash, but the common thread between all of these warnings is that we don't know when is it going to come, but the moment it comes, it's going to be really, really bad. So it's almost like saying, hey, each one of us is going to die. I'm not going to tell you when are you going to die, but let me just tell you that you're going to die. So it has put investors in quite a precarious position. They don't know how to enter, when to enter, is it the right time? So what's your reading on the valuation situation in the broader markets today?
So if I look at uh, India against say emerging market, right? So if I
Hmm,
look at MSCI India versus MSCI EM, India looks expensive, like on
right.
any valuation parameter on a relative basis, and on an absolute basis, you've seen the PE chart; there are
Hmm,
above the averages, right?
hmm,
On a relative basis, also India is expensive. And if I look at mid cap and small cap, there it's even more expensive, right? The earnings have not come about, or as you said, the market is pricing in way too much earnings. Uh,
right.
but flows matter, right? I mean, especially in that mid and small cap, it's a illiquid segment in some sense, right? So when there is a
Right.
lot of flows, it tends to drive prices both ways, up and down. When the money goes out, as you saw in 2018,
Right.
as people moved out of small cap, mid cap, because of push ILFS, you had an impact on valuations. Uh, Two, three things. I mean, in terms of earnings, maybe there is significant earnings price. Some of it could be justified, some of it could be excessive. But earnings will have to normalize, right? 2020 was bad, and then 2021 is kind of stabilizing on a macro basis, and then we'll have to see how it goes. But if for something that I understand, so I work at Quantum, and we are value investors, right? So
Hmm,
I've been seeing value investing for the last 20 years,
right.
and typically at market peaks, the value portfolio will increase the cash levels, right? We'll hold certainly larger amounts, larger percentage of cash. Uh, the cash is rising, but it's not as high as in previous market peaks. And maybe there are two, three dynamics that are playing. Uh, One is this, over the last 3 4 years, you've seen this trend of large getting larger, small getting smaller, right? So that entire movement towards informal economy either shutting down or just not being able to compete with all these headwinds that I spoke about, and the large listed corporates, good balance sheet, good management, efficiency in operations, good brand, they've been
Hmm,
able to capture certain amount of market share. So their potential to grow is higher than the economy's potential to grow in some sense, right? Because they're trying to get market share out of existing players. Low interest rates and liquidity has helped also. So these are two things that I will talk in favor of. Why, although markets are extremely expensive on absolute and relative basis, but there are certain things going around uh, which are market dynamics, and the market itself is very dynamic. Right? There are a lot of things changing, like COVID. If you look at the global economy, it didn't worry, and now the Delta worry is there. So now there are little bit of scare of, if the global economy slows down, you should see a correction. Yeah, I think you should see a correction in the sense that if flows come exit India. But if I look at from a slightly wider perspective, India, despite all the inflows that we got in the last 1.5 years in the equity markets, foreigners on a total wealth basis own less than 0.5% of India in their portfolio, right? So India still has a significant amount of space of investments that you can get from foreigners. And I'll give you some data. Uh, if I look at total investment pool, so the global pension funds are about $50 trillion. The insurance companies are about $30 trillion. The
hmm,
sovereign wealth funds have about $8 trillion. The global wealthy individuals, right, they're about $100 trillion. So totally about 250, $270 trillion of wealth. And the amount of investments in India is, if I put everything, equity, fixed income, private equity, real estate, will be less than $1 trillion. So if I look at from that perspective, India still has, if India keeps doing the right things in terms of markets and regulations and stability in the economy, stability in the RBI, fiscal prudence, you should be able to attract all that money, right? So and
Right.
add to that the China scare, like whatever has happened in China over the last 1 year in terms of how they have gone behind tech and education, real estate, finance. A lot of investors should really start worrying whether how much money should I invest in China, and is there another market, and so India is that large big market which can absorb these flows. So these are two things that are playing side by side. There is expense, the valuation is expensive on the public equity market. Maybe in the private equity and venture capital it's even more, right? The valuations are almost stratospheric there.
Right.
But it's driven by, as you said, liquidity and low rates, and this broad theme that if India does well in all regulations, taxation, we should be able to attract not the money in billions, but over a 10-15 year period, you should be able to attract $1 trillion, right? From
Right.
from these large investors. That's where we are. So short term, yes, valuations are expensive. We should be careful because you're pricing in very high growth, and if that doesn't come about and the global economy also stutters, you will face an impact. I don't have a short term target or anything like that, but these are the two things that you need to keep in mind.
Understood, understood. So, as long as we're talking about valuation, and you spoke
Yeah.
about attracting money and private money, private equity, venture capital, it would almost be a cardinal sin to not talk about the recent consumer tech listing that Zomato,
Yeah.
featured on.
Yeah.
And I feel this is the dawn of a new era with Zomato listing. At least, the world is torn into half between opinions on how should one value a company like Zomato. And while the world is still debating, and while the jury is still out on the right way to evaluate, or rather assign a value to such a
Yeah.
company, there are many more such consumer tech companies that are on its way to get listed.
Yeah.
And judging by the money that Zomato attracted, it is only left to one's imagination that how much more money could be pumped into these erstwhile
Yeah.
privately funded consumer tech companies going ahead. So, what
Right.
are your views on the rise of such consumer tech companies, the listing of them, and the general, valuation approach that one should have while looking at these companies?
The valuation part is easy to answer. We are struggling. We are value investors, right? This is so difficult for us to make sense and then value. We track those companies, and
Right.
as they get listed, we will keep tracking them. But whether it fits in a long only value managers prism, it's
Mm.
very difficult to say. Right now it doesn't, but markets always give chances, right? Markets will always give opportunities to invest. On a broader level, I think this is great. Look at from an equity investor, for my choice of investing in large liquid names is only going to increase, right? So
Right.
we've already had insurance companies getting listed, asset management, retail, financial services. All
Mm.
these companies have already got listed over the period, and many more will get listed. And then we have this consumer internet names, right? These are they're making profit, not making profit, but the opportunity set for investing is just getting wider. And some of these new age private equity, venture capital backed or promoter, the startup founder, their governance also tends to be better, right? I,
Right.
I won't, but on a general level basis, right? They will be much more, should be shareholder friendly, should be much more governance, should be also employee friendly. Like they're actually taking care of the overall ecosystem, as again just thinking only about their
Right.
profitability and stuff like that. And that's what the models also show, right?
Right.
That is very good. That's very good from a long term investor perspective. From a short term, right now for us, this is very difficult to value and invest. The valuations that they are commanding for a discounted cash flow that we are looking at, say over a 5, 10, 15 year period, very very difficult to get into a value manager's portfolio. But
Right.
opportunity set widening is a broader thing. And I read some data where some investment bankers have said that the consumer internet tech
Mm.
itself will add hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap.
Right.
All of these are private equity funded. Private equity funds have a timeline. They have to exit.
Right.
And if the IPO markets are buoyant, then they will get exited in the IPO markets more and more.
Right.
The fact that they're listing in India also is a bigger thing, right? Otherwise, ideally, you would have listed in Nasdaq.
Right.
But the fact that they are chosen to listing in India, these are all very good from a long-term, public equity space.
Right. Right. So, in fact, even I put this post out when Zomato listed. Obviously, the jury is out on the valuation, but hey,
Yeah,
let's take a step back and acknowledge the larger wins. Startups are
absolutely.
preferring Indian indices. They are wanting to get listed in India. They obviously have access to all global markets. They have the SPAC route to take. But
Yep.
despite having all of that, they choose to list in India, and the kind of response that we have seen is phenomenal. I feel this is going to be a segue to a new era of Indian equities, wherein we are going to have a champion versus challenger sort of a situation, with most traditional conventional companies being challenged by these unconventional, and such setups are really really healthy for the economy as a whole, the capital market as a whole. We have seen this happening
Absolutely.
in developed economies, right? So
Yep.
so great. I'm really excited for times to come on the equity side. So while we're talking about equities and capital markets and economics, all of this is for a reason, right? As an investor,
Yep.
the only reason for me to follow global domestic economics and capital markets is to make a decision on how do I create my portfolio, right?
Sure.
And when I talk about creating my portfolio, I know it is almost imperative that I need to start with asset allocation, right?
Yep.
But there are a lot many gurus who talk about asset allocation. There are a lot many approaches that talk about asset allocation, but it only leaves the investor more and more confused. And the most popular way of deciding asset allocation is, taking a guess,
Yeah.
just taking a lucky shot at it. कि मार्केट अभी अच्छा चल रहा है, 20% सेफ रखना है तो 20% फिक्शन कम में रखते हैं, बाकी 80% मार्केट में रखते हैं. Or
Yeah.
else they would try and Google search something, and the very first result would be, why don't you subtract your age from 100, which
Yeah.
in my opinion is amusing at best, right? So what is your take on a topic as basic yet as critical as asset allocation? How should one decide the right asset allocation?
So, for a recent article that I wrote on asset allocation, I Googled asset allocation, and it had 165 million pages, Google searches. So, as you said, it is simple, and I think the most discussed. And I myself struggled. I am a CIO. I am 42 now, and I started my career in the in financial markets in 2002. Till about 2012, I was investing, but in random, right? I mean, I had no plan. I had no financial plan, and I made all the mistakes, right? I did the hot NFOs that came from other mutual funds. I survived the ULIP. I call that ULIPs of that time, 2005, 2008, as the biggest financial scam in the country. I survived that because at Quantum we were very low cost. We pioneered the direct investing. We had the no entry load. So I survived that. But I fell in the hot NFOs. I did all IPOs, 2007,
Right.
2008. And I realized that, most of it, quite a bit of that I exited in 2014, 15 when I bought a house at a loss,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
I really had investing and making money. No, I'm not saying I didn't make money, but I had no plan. So
Right.
I would recommend everyone to get a financial plan made and involve your spouse or your family in it. Uh, the best thing that the financial plan did for me is that it has now I've come to a level where, and it's got nothing to do with my age. It's got nothing to do
Mm,
with my income. It's got
mm,
nothing to do with the knowledge that I have about the financial market. It's got nothing
right.
to do all. But even for me, it has just freed my mind in terms of my finances and my other priorities in life, right? And that is very important. I think once you are clear about this is what you do, this is what you want, this is what you have to work on, then you can just leave that investment aside and enjoy the other aspects of life, right? That is the foremost, and that's why I tell you involve your family to do it. And today you can do financial planning by a click of a few buttons, right? It's free almost on
Right.
all. It's fintech guys have just made life so much easy for everybody, right? So
Right.
you can do it free. You can approach a financial planner. uh, I started doing that in 2013-14, and can I give a personal example?
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah.
We would love to hear it.
So as I said, I made my mistakes. I didn't have a financial plan for almost 10 years, and then for the last 4-5 years, or about 6 years, I basically run three broad portfolios, three broad goals. Right, one is my wealth portfolio, one is my retirement portfolio, and the third is my child education portfolio. Right,
Hmm.
in my wealth, I know I have another 25-30 years to invest, and so my risk appetite is very high. So I do 65-75% equities.
Hmm.
In debt, I don't. Debt allocation is for safety and liquidity and diversification. I do not take any risk on debt. So I will not do credit. I will not do high end fixed deposit. I will not do cooperative bank fixed deposit. I'll just make it safe and liquid. Uh, and so in between liquid funds and dynamic bond funds is where my allocation. And I have 5% gold.
Hmm.
So that's it. And so even in equity, I just have three funds. Now it might not work for you. I am somebody who likes concentration. You might want to have slightly broader allocation, but I just have three funds to do. For my retirement portfolio, I do only NPS. So we have a corporate NPS plan, and so yeah, I can't touch it till 60. I get a tax break from my salary directly, and it goes into 75% equity, 25% debt. That's it. Simple. I just don't look at every month it goes out of my salary. I don't need to do anything. For my daughter's education, I have 90% equity, 5 to 10% gold. Because and the gold, there are two reasons for gold. One, for the daughter's portfolio, it is purely if she intends to study abroad, and
Right.
Indian currency as against the dollar will depreciate, right? So the cost
Right.
of that education is increasing, and one way to diversify away from that is to put in gold. The
Right.
other way I look at gold is it's for me, gold is a insurance against stupidity. So if against central bank stupidity, against government stupidity, you know against politicians stupidity, it's gold
Hmm.
is that insurance. I don't really
Hmm.
care about. I actually tell everybody that buy gold and hope it falls,
Hmm.
because if
Hmm.
gold is falling, that means something else is doing well. So your job is doing well, your business is doing well, economy is doing well, equity markets are doing well, right? so
Right.
so that's the way I see gold, and I find it very, very important to have that. Before I did all this, I did, of course, a term insurance, I did medical insurance, and I also created a what I call an emergency corpus.
Hmm.
So which is it can be 6 months of your expense, it can be a year of your annual expense, just to ensure that it gives you security that if COVID happens and if lockdown happens and you don't have a job, or you
Right.
you can't run your business, then at least you have a years or a 6 months, or depending on which job, what work you do, you have some corpus which is set aside, very, very safe. You can keep it in your cash in your under your mattress, or you keep it in a safe fixed deposit, or you keep it in a liquid fund, but keep it as safe as it can. You can't take any risk with that, because that's your
Right.
secure money, right? So
Right.
you did that, and then this plain allocations. And I've almost, I don't do stocks anymore. I just do funds. So for people who can't select funds, then there are, mutual funds have equity fund of funds. There is multi-asset funds. There's asset allocation funds, and now all fintech. It's so easy to choose, right? It's so
Right.
easy to choose and invest and allocate. So just use that. If you can't figure out which fund to invest, then just use your equity fund of funds, or a multi-asset fund, or a asset allocation product. Just keep it
Right.
as simple as possible. Simple, low cost is, it works, so that you don't have to worry. Now I'll give you an example, like March 2020, right?
Hmm.
My equity portfolio fell quite drastically, right?
Hmm.
So I whatever lump sum I had, I allocated. I did
Right.
some SIPs, I increased my SIPs. I didn't need to think about my retirement portfolio. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it falls today, because I need it 20 years later. So,
Right.
when you bucket it like this, sounds complicated. It is not. But once you do a financial plan, and then you know this, and it's got nothing to do with your income. Even if you're doing a 5,000 rupee asset allocation, you can do it, right. You can follow the same process for a 5,000 rupee allocation. Somebody can
Right.
do a 5 lakh rupee allocation. It really doesn't matter. Age matters in terms of a risk profile and your job.
Right.
What job do you have, what kind of income streams you have, what kind of liabilities you have, right. you know
Right.
yeah. So
So great, great. So over here, I was contemplating whether I should insert a pseudo ad or not, but I'll anyways go ahead. So guys, for the listeners, if any of you are facing difficulties with how should you construct your portfolio, or you need more information around any fund, etc., anything investments, write to us at research@fesdom.com. My team is here. We'll be here to help you out. So Arvind, this while you were sharing your personal experience, I
Yeah.
couldn't help but notice one key revelation that you made about having just three equity funds,
Yeah.
right, within your portfolio. And I am sure most of our listeners and most investors would cringe at the very thought of having just three equity funds, because in their head, the more the number of funds, the more your risk is optimized, the more efficiently you are accruing the benefits of diversification. So here's the question,
Yeah.
I have seen many investors hold as many. I have seen an investor hold at least 82 funds in
Yeah.
a single portfolio. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is where my next question is coming from. How many is too many when it comes to diversification? Where do you draw the line? Or rather, how do you decide that it's high time you draw the line on adding new funds and not just buying into anything and everything you see?
it, it actually, if you approach it from a perspective of simplicity, right?
Hmm.
Like, if you the simple your investment strategy is, I think it works better, because it might not give you the best returns. Now that's the thing, right? If you want the best return from everything that you do, then you will of course have 80 funds, right? Because you'll say,
Right.
oh, abhi infra acha hai. Then you'll say, Are abhi to matlab financial services is doing very well, I should go
Right.
into ETF. You'll do
Uh,
all kinds of things, right? uh,
right.
but if your return objective is to be around the market, right?
Right.
Be around the market, then, and keep it as simple, because how many SIPs will you run? Because
Right.
making one lump sum investment and then not adding to it is, again, it's that doesn't build you compound wealth, right? If you're convinced about something and then you keep
Right.
adding to it over a period of time, that's when you, and if that works out well for you,
Right.
that's when you come. So I think if you have to approach it from a perspective of simplicity. I'll do add one thing. I didn't say this. So I also have khujli of market timing, right? I am a fund
Right.
manager, right? I mean, if I don't time, then I'll feel like, "Arey, main kya kar raha hu," right?
Right.
So although I do market timing. In that, I use sector funds.
Right.
So, but I restrict it to very, like, less than 10% of portfolio. So certain times, like say post ILFS, when the banking financial services cramped out very badly,
Hmm.
so I added a banking fund, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Auto similarly. So
Right.
I will do something like that. But what I've learned is, the in a diversified equity fund, you can invest and leave it, right?
Right.
If the fund manager is good, the philosophy you like, your strategy is good, you can just keep investing and leave it. In a sector fund, you cannot, because just as you time your investment, you time your exit also. So that
Right.
adds the complexity. That has made my investment slightly more complex than I would like, because now I'm trying to market time. But that's for my personal satisfaction. I want to think that I can time. I'm smart. I know the market. So
Hmm.
so so I do that with a few, like two or three, four sector funds. But still, I would three might be less. I agree. I mean, it might not be three. Like, in a fund of fund that we run, we used to do 5 to 7, right?
Right.
That's broadly. So if, as I said, I think in India, fund of funds have still not picked up, right? But I
Right.
believe for a investor who does not have time, who's a retail investor, does not have investment knowledge, but just
Mhm.
wants to follow asset allocation, fund of funds are great. Right? Equity fund of funds, or asset allocation funds. Just put in that, and then keep your return target in mind. I mean, if you invest in a debt fund of fund and expect it to give you 15%, it's not going to happen, right? So you need to have relative benchmarking of what this product is supposed to give me over a return, and what is supposed to do to my portfolio. Once you do that, uh, but 10 funds, 15 funds, my problem is you'll get diversification, maybe over diversification. How do you track it? How do you
Right.
manage it? And which one do you add to? Right? When the market cracks and you have money in your hand and you want to
Right.
allocate, which of those 80 funds or 10 funds are you choosing? So
Right. Right. Arvind, as we move towards the close of the session,
Yeah,
there is one important question that I absolutely need your perspective on. So here's the context, right? So
yeah.
when markets are at an apparent peak, like it is now, and I call it apparent for a reason,
Yeah.
right? So when the markets are at an apparent peak, the world is majorly divided into two types of people. One who immediately hop onto the fences and wait for the metaphorical dust to settle, and on the other side we have people just trying to enter the markets via equity stocks directly, and the record number of demat account
Yeah.
openings is a testament to this sentiment that has taken over the larger crowd, right? So the
Yeah.
world is broadly divided into these two types of people, and I'd like to believe that somewhere or the other none of them are entirely correct in their approach, right? So, what is that one single piece of advice that you'd like to give to investors who are thinking about investing into equity markets, especially when they are at an apparent peak like it is right now?
My God. Uh, I'll go back to, I mean, so a macro answer for this.
Sure, please.
Indians are underallocated to equities, big time,
Right,
right? So the average, if you look at those RBI data, less than 5% of Indians, retail Indians, have exposure to equity. So
right,
any exposure to equity in your long-term journey is only needed, right? So you whether you
right,
do it, so that's the first aspect. So maybe Indians are over allocated to fixed income and real estate and very
right,
less allocated to equity. So that balance
right,
has to change.
right,
So it's great to see so many new demat accounts opening, and some of them will do direct equities. Who know? Most of them will suffer. That's been the historical trend. I'm not saying that everything will happen now, but that's been the
yes,
historical trend, right? People make mistakes. Also, when you do direct stocks, I think your portfolio will be a lot more concentrated, right?
hmm,
You won't have too many stocks when you're doing direct stocks, right?
right,
So that's a risk, like in a stock perspective. Like in a fund, when we're saying we need 5 funds to have diversification,
mm,
if you have only 5 stocks and you are
mm,
not a regular research analyst who's tracking the market, it can be very,
right,
very risky, right? So that concentration risk is very high when you do direct stocks. And the second is, think why you're doing it. I mean, what is your horizon? Are you only trading? Like if it's only for very short term trading, then fine, then you can do whatever you want. And then mostly, as a lot of data shows, 90% of the retail investors, when they trade, they kind of tend to lose money, right?
right,
So it really depends on the objective. I will add in this. You didn't speak about crypto, right? I just
right,
recently I got added to a crypto WhatsApp group
hmm,
by someone,
hmm,
and the discussions there were crazy. I mean, people are just doing it purely for speculation, which is great for a market liquidity. But I don't know how many. So if that is your objective, then of course, then you play and you live and die with it. But
right,
if investments, long term investments, and say wealth creation is your objective through that,
right,
so then you build your asset allocation, and then you always keep your 5%, 10% of your portfolio for doing all this masti, right?
mm,
Something that you can trade and lose and not worry about it. For all that,
right,
you can do crypto and you can do direct stocks, you can do small cap, B group, and all those things. But for the larger part, as early if you do a financial plan, right,
right.
you're in a better path. So keep some money for masti, which is a very small percent, but the rest you try and do a dedicated financial investment.
Absolutely. So, Arvind, you have just given me a great idea for one of my next interactions. I think I'm going to dedicate an episode to cryptocurrencies
Okay.
very, very soon. So, guys listening, let me give you a heads up. This is now already on my mind, and I'm going to be having an episode dedicated to cryptos. So, Arvind, this has been a lovely conversation. I think we have spoken about so many important, critical things. It almost feels as if I have incessantly been pushing you to cover everything under the big blue sky. It was so exciting. I was completely indulging in your perspectives. I'm completely appreciative of the information and insights that you have been sharing. I'm just so glad that we had this conversation today, and you took out the time to share your insights with each one of us. I'm really grateful for that. Thank So, Arvind, thanks, for taking out time.
I loved it, Nirav. Thank you so much, and thank you for I actually prepared for this, right? So based on what you wanted me to cover, I think
Right,
we covered quite a bit. I don't know
right.
how much people got out of it, but I think we covered quite a bit of it, and would love to attend your crypto session. I have my views on it, but I would love to hear what your experts have to say.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely, Arvind. I'll keep you in touch. I will share the details as soon as I freeze on it. So, Arvind, thanks a lot. It's been
Thank you.
great having this conversation with you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.